So you tell me when we live. Already? Okay. Hi, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this Breakaway Session 6 of the Creative Arts Conference. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of introducing Brendon Bussy. Brendon, let me tell you a little background about Brendon. In 2014, he won the Western Province Teachers Awards for Special Needs and Inclusive Education. And then in 2015, he was placed second in the National Awards. So Brendon is a teacher, and he teaches FET and design and creative arts at the Dominican School for the Deaf here in Wynberg in Cape Town. He studied fine art and education, and he also did a lot of community-based art projects for street children and shelters, and also a prison. For the last 8 years, though, he has been focusing on deaf education. So, Brendon, I'm really excited to welcome you to this platform, and we can't wait to hear what you have to share with us. So, over to you.
Hi, thanks so much. Can you hear me? Hopefully everyone can hear me at this point. Can you
hear me?
Yes, we
can hear you loud and clear.
Oh, that's great. That seems to be the sort of standard greeting on Zoom platforms. You know, can you hear me? Which sounds like sort of a song title of some kind. Yeah, so basically I come from quite a varied background. I've just been watching Johan Lingenfelder's presentation on the promise and speaking about the toolbox. And I come from a background, very varied background in community-based visual arts, playing in string quartets, writing music for string quartets, and musical theatre, all kinds of things. Before I became a full-time teacher, I was actually working in physical theatre, and physical theatre really attracted me because it was a lot about making things as well as performing, and I found that a very, very interesting combination. So I basically started working in special needs. I started working at the Batswood Arts Centre, and then later on took up a post at the Dominican School for Deaf Children. Teaching in a deaf environment is quite unique, obviously, because our deaf environment, we use sign language a lot. And this is the environment that I came into, and I found that all the tools in my toolbox became useful, and in the most unexpected ways. So what I'd like to do in this presentation is I'm going to just give I've got a slideshow which I'd like to show, which gives a little bit of documentation of my background in terms of working with deaf performers and deaf children. And then I'm going to hand over to my one of my classes, actually my grade 9 class is currently this year. And they're going to describe a technique that I use that I've been developing for about 10 years now for doing body percussion and table percussion. Involves one of my favorite subjects, which is basically graphic scores and working with symbols and pictograms, something that really interests me as a designer and as a visual artist. And of course, language, because when you work in a special needs environment, especially a deaf environment, language becomes a very important thing. By learning sign language, you start thinking really hard about how language actually works, and start, so interrogating even the way you speak your home language, English or Afrikaans or whatever, and it becomes really, really interesting. So let me jump into the presentation. It should be about 15 minutes or so, and then I'm going to leave a little bit of a gap at the end, because what I'd like to do is, answering questions, but also I want to be able to just describe a little bit of, about the methods I use in terms of using my hands and my body, because sign language is a visual thing, and the deaf environment is a very visual teaching environment. So I'm just going to start that presentation now. Okay, so making shape beats, creative arts in the deaf classroom. Now, shape beats refers to the concept in shape singing. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's something which is used in the US quite a lot in terms of traditional gospel type singing, where you use a solfa type scale and use images of various symbols to indicate the scale. But anyhow, it's a bit of a play on words. Now, one thing about creative arts for deaf learners is that the curriculum is in some ways inaccessible, not entirely accessible to deaf learners. So the question often, for example, is whether to teach, music or drama. And I don't come from a dance background, so my choices were really music or drama. And then I found, looking at aspects of the curriculum in both music and drama, there were some aspects which were inaccessible to my deaf learners for obvious reasons. They might, for example, be required to do a choral verse or sing a song, and that isn't going to happen. However, the thing about deaf culture and deaf children is they love music, and it's not just because most people think because they can't hear that music is not part of their lives, but deafness is really on the spectrum. So some kids will be hard of hearing, they'll have some hearing, and some kids basically also, may be profoundly deaf, but that doesn't mean that they're not interested in music, the culture of music, for example. So I found that over the years, I've developed a kind of a mixed curriculum, somewhere between music and drama. Now, this is an example, a project working with FTHK, a drama company which still exists in some form. They're basically non-verbal visual theatre with deaf and hearing artists. And I ran a workshop some years back where I was looking at basically using a variety of apparatus. You can see in the image there, you can see metal saw blades, which have a wonderful resonance, all kinds of objects, and basically just seeing how deaf performers respond to objects which are very resonant. I'm going to show you a short video. This is a jam session. It was a series of events organized by the Edge of Wrong, a very interesting musical sort of intervention which used to come to South Africa via Norway. And this is just an afternoon jam session with some of my learners with a variety of apparatus. Some, you can see in the image there, a child holding a harp, which is made from a plastic bottle and Perspex PVC pipe. One of the things that I make with them, made with some of my kids. And also a variety of just conventional instruments. And we're just having a good old noisy session. So, yeah, just going back to that slide there. So it sounds like a raucous noise, but the thing about it is that when you work in the deaf environment, you really, really just have to open your ears and open your mind to the possibilities and see what the learners step up and produce. Basically, speaking about the conventions of music, sometimes you have to throw those out of the window and you have to say, look, let's just make some noise and let's just see what happens. Now, when I first interacted with Dominican School for Deaf Children, I was actually working as a volunteer. I worked at another school, and the Batsford Arts Centre, which used to have used to get a fee, which was basically fed by members of the Dominican school. So the Dominican school used to send some of the deaf learners to the Batsford Arts Centre, and I interacted with them first there. And I became really, really interested in deaf culture and deaf art making and music. So I started volunteering at the Dominican School for Deaf Children. So I'd go there one afternoon or 2 afternoons a week on my way home. And we did all kinds of things. We experimented with cup games, we did sign poetry, we did all kinds of things. So this is just a little clip of a sort of a cup game jam. Yeah, so they're very, very energetic. And as you can see, we're working with the barest essentials. We're not using any musical instruments, we're using yogurt containers, school desk. And that's the kind of approach I really like, So what techniques can you actually use and develop, which just use the things that you have around you in a school environment? So this is actually a performance which I don't unfortunately have video of it, or a good video of it, but it's a performance that we developed, which was using those kinds of apparatus, basically cup games, school desks, very, very basic props. And yeah, just using a combination of sign language, physical theatre, and table percussion. When I was first volunteering, I had very little sign language. I just started learning sign language, and I was asked to produce a performance for a festival, the Edge of Wrong Festival in Cape Town, and basically realized that I had to find some means of communicating or collaboratively with the performance, developing a performance involving but not being able to use sign language, which complicated things. So I really just needed to find a way of communicating. This is the actual performance. The group called themselves G-Force. The performance was called Normal Noise. And it involved basically interacting with the sort of world of noise as a deaf person. Now, most of the performers in this group were profoundly deaf. And the idea was that they would sort of interact with sound in its broadest sense, in terms of touch, in terms of vibration. And at one point, I even remember them shouting. Now, there's another picture of myself warming up with them. So I use this process of storyboarding. And if you look, this is a selection of some of the sort of flashcards that we used. So what we did is basically we had scrap pieces of paper, which we laid down on the ground. And people would, we would basically just sketch images onto the paper and sort of describing various scenes or aspects of the performance, and then just number them and reorder them. You know, if something wasn't working, we'd just take the piece of paper and crumple it up and throw it away. But, you know, for example, in the top left-hand corner slide, you can see the flashcard, you can see the word shout, and it's a mouth opening. And that point in performance, performers would shout, and so on and so on. So it was really about sort of finding a way of using images and basic text to communicate. This is another performance which I produced where we just used chairs. And here's the pictogram score, part of the pictogram score, where I started trying to develop a more sophisticated way of describing the performance, using a symbol. You look at the top right-hand corner, sort of a chair-like object from the back, someone sitting on the chair. And this is a way of almost scoring the performance using a basic set of images. One of the big inspirations for this kind of sort of scoring performance are graphic scores. Here's an example of a graphic score. For those not familiar with graphic scores, they're sort of alternative ways of expressing standard music performance, or sometimes experimental music performance using non-Western, sort of not using Western music notation. So in this score, for example, there's the use of line and some specific symbols which might denote specific actions. Sign language itself doesn't really have an accepted written form. And certainly in South Africa, we don't write sign language. Sign language is very distinct, and from any spoken language, it's its own language. And however, there have been some experiments in other parts of the world to write sign language. And someone called Valerie Sutton developed something called Sutton sign writing, and she first developed it for describing and choreographing dance. So you can see the images of dancers on a musical stage. You can also use the same technique for describing other things like skateboarding, for example. And here's a more developed form. This is actually a page or part of the story of the three bears. And you can see, if you look at some of those images, some of those, like the one in the center left, is denoting a sort of angry bear. So I did a lot of experimentation and research on all these kinds of symbols that people use, and I started trying to develop my own set of symbols. And these are, you know, some scribbles from my sketchpad at the time. Now, let's go into the demonstration by my grade 9 class. Okay, so after this quite a long period of time, I've kind of distilled that system down into a very basic set of symbols. And you can see on the left there, a piece of paper folded to show kind of beat demarcations and basic symbol system. Okay, so let's go ahead and my grade 9 show you how this is done. So first of all, this is a warm-up session, and this is how we normally warm up. It's a call and response process where one learner will basically do an action, and then everyone else will repeat the action. And there's a kind of a rocking motion because the person who's directing it is sort of leading the rhythm, but there's call and response. It's kind of back and forth. So let's have a watch. Great. So what you can see there is basically, it's kind of teamwork, because some of those learners are hearing more than others, but there's also the table, and they're all collectively beating that table, and there's that sort of sympathetic vibration which everyone is feeling. There's also sort of synergy as people, as my learners, as a group performs together and works together. There's a greater synergy and there's a better synchronization which occurs. Okay, so these are the 4 symbols that I generally use today. From a sort of vast collection of ideas, I've come down with 4 symbols. You can see them right there, and this is a demonstration of the 4 symbols. So if you can see in the bottom screen, the X is basically a clap. The square shape is basically a fist on the table. The triangle is a flat hand on the table, and the underscore line is basically hands on either side splayed out in the air, and that's kind of almost like a rest. Let's just watch it again. Oops, sorry. Great. So that's how we'd roughly notate it. The 4 on the left, in this case, we're speaking about a 4-beat rhythm. We've got a count-in, and we've got an action happening on each beat. Okay, let's see someone demonstrate the count-in. There you go. So the count-in obviously will change. The final beat is always tapped out on the forearm. So if there's 3 beats, you'd have 1, 2, and 3 would be beaten on the forearm. Okay, so we can also create beat divisions. So here we have the first beat is a single action, second beat 2 actions, third beat single action, the fourth beat a single action. Let's see that demonstrated. Right. If anyone's interested at the end, if we have some time, if anyone wants any of the videos repeated, I might repeat them. Okay, let's go. Okay, let's insert some rests. Okay, so here we've got a first beat, which is pretty straightforward. The second beat is a little bit more complicated. We want to break that into 2 parts. Basically, I suppose you could say the quarter notes, but the first quarter note is going to be silent.
Brendon, we can't see your screen.
Has it been like that for a while?
No, it's just gone off now. After that, when you share the last break, the last beat.
Okay. Okay, should I basically just take off share screen and then reshare?
Yeah, you can just go back again.
Okay, so I'm going to cancel share screen sharing and then just share again. Can you see me now?
Yeah, then we're back again, yeah.
And can you see the...
Yes, perfect, yeah.
Presenter?
Yeah.
Perfect, okay. Okay, I suppose I should apologize, but I'm not sure whose fault it was. Okay, I meant to go from current slide. Can you see it now?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Fantastic, okay. So just to quickly do that again, the first beat is simple. It's just a clap. The second beat is broken up. So, okay, let me just go back. Okay, this is where we should be. This is the first part. So first beat simple, second beat broken into two with the rest and a fist. Okay, this is what it looks like. Okay, so that's swinging a bit now, swinging a little bit, and let's have a look at another version. So this is another way we could do it. We could have a clap on the first beat, and the second beat broken up as well, and this time the rest is the second quarter note. Let's see what it looks like. Great. Now we can see what will happen if we put them both together. So they're each separately playing a part, but if we put them together, we'll get something like a basic, simple interlocking rhythm. Okay, so there we have something simple. So it actually looks very simple, but remembering that these learners are deaf, to get to this point of being able to synchronize and not always doing the same thing, but doing something in two parts, which interlock, is quite tricky. So that's more or less what the two parts would look like together as a very basic score. You can see in the beat number 2, that's where the sort of interesting stuff is happening, where the interlocking part is happening. And then 3 and 4 alternating the triangle, which is the slap on the table surface. Okay, how do we write rhythms? So what we do is we often work with, one of the first approaches I have is working with chants. So here's one of my learners working with the dice, and he has a reference which he uses. Each action has a dice number, and he uses that for writing a score on a piece of folded paper. There you go. You might notice that there isn't really much accenting in the beat, but that is something that we work on later. Dynamics, loud and soft, accenting the first beat, and that kind of thing. But for the moment, we often just start keeping it simple when we first start. So that, for example, would be the reference. 1 would be clap, 2 would be fist on the surface of the table, 3 would be flat hand on the table, 4 rest, and 5 you would rethrow. And you could get quarter note divisions, and 6 is basically a wild card, anything that you want. So a little bit of gamifying. Kids love dice, use dice for a lot of things in the classroom, and that gets us writing some pieces. So there we go. We fold paper to make a grid showing where to put whole, half, and quarter beats. So that's an example, and I'm going to show an example of some of my learners practicing. They're using some other symbols there as well. I'll explain them a little bit later. So a lot of assisting each other. It's really, really about teamwork, working together, because, and the really interesting thing is that, you know, people might make an assumption that a learner who has better hearing would have better sense of rhythm, but that's just not true. You can have the strongest performer, person with the rock solid rhythm and ability to swing and do all kinds of interesting beats, and that person might be the person who has the most profound hearing loss. So rhythm is something which is sort of almost intrinsic. It's deep in our soul and our physical bodies and the way we move and everything else, and it isn't defined by deafness. Just some of my learners working together on their scores. Okay, there are a few other things you can do. In fact, there are a lot of things you can do, but I'm just showing you a few examples. You could also use directionality, moving an action through space. So the symbol on the left starts at the top and basically descends down. Let's see what a score looks like, and let's see a performance. Okay, so what they're doing is they're doing an action which is a bit more complex. It starts up in the sky and it comes down. There's a sign there which they use. They've borrowed something from sign language, which is wait. When I'm back on video screen, I'll show it more clearly. But basically, that they've used, they've kind of improvised. So look, we're working with a score that we've made, but essentially that's only a springboard, because the kids want to kind of swing it. They want to like throw it aside and just make up their own beat. Use the dice process, and the writing is just purely as inspiration and not something to lock them in. Then they can really go for it. Okay, so they're having a lot of fun there. So they've kind of used the notation process as a springboard to develop their own rhythm. That's more or less what it would look like, what they've just done. The sort of triangle with arrow coming out of it. The triangle basically means slap the ground and then move action upwards. And there's an X at the top and an arrow pointing downwards. The X means clap in the air and then move the action down. So it's kind of moving it through in space. And of course, this system can be adapted in all kinds of ways. You can develop your own symbols, meaning all kinds of things. You can borrow from systems, for example, bliss symbols, which has been used in special needs for teaching people who struggle to speak audibly. And it's a writing system using pictograms. These are the symbols for vampire. And of course, you could also use the entire human body, and that would be a discussion for another workshop, because I have used systems where we learn to draw the figure as part of a creative arts exercise, and then we also use it to choreograph the body. Let's make notation, music making more open, accessible, and fun. And yeah, basically, I've written. If you contact me at this email address, I'll put it in the notes in the chat as well. Rhythm in the classroom. I've written notes on body percussion in the classroom, and I've also written a paper on graphic notation. And I'm going to stop sharing now. Great, that's the presentations part over it. So I'm not sure if people want to start posting questions. I might just also just illustrate a few of the actions that I couldn't describe as easily because I wasn't really visible. But that is wait. It's a very useful sign in sign language, because it can be everything from just wacht 'n minuut, just wait a little bit, to sit down, stay there, to in the actions of the piece that we just saw, it was kind of just wait. It was their version of arrest. And that sort of action where you sort of the cross at the top and then the arrow down would have been something like this, down, and so on and so on. Yeah, so I don't know if people have any questions or thoughts about my presentation.
Lots of comments, Brendon, just saying like how amazing and how interesting, awesome, love the ideas. But so we've got about another 11 minutes. So if you'd love to go ahead and share, then that'd be great. So we could do that. And then also I'll just pop your email address into the chat too, and then people can contact you directly. Is that okay?
Yeah. So if people have any specific questions, that'd be great. This is really just the sort of the surface of what I've been doing. This is one in particular systems, but essentially it's a system that I've developed that I can sort of rely on from day to day. So if I need to do, for example, a project and I need to do assessment, then the learners know what they need to do. And we can sort of push out really interesting rhythms very quickly, because I say, okay, guys, we're going to do this system. We're going to use your symbols. You're going to use the dice. You're going to generate a rhythm. Then you're going to do this and you're going to do that. And with this, unfortunately, the pressure in education with assessment nowadays, you can also do an assessment. So, for example, in tests, I'll do something equivalent, and some of you have done music teaching or been involved in music teaching. You do oral testing. So, for example, what I'll do is I will play a rhythm, and then they have to write it down. So it's just something that I can use in the context of the curriculum of the classroom, but we also make it a lot broader. I've just seen there's a question, do you ever transfer the body percussion on instruments, and how does it work introducing pitch? I have done it in the past. The amount of time available in the classroom, unfortunately, is a little bit of a stricture. And also the fact that my learners, being in a deaf environment, things are a little bit slower. So in terms of communicating, I found that using simple things like plastic containers, using tables, where construction isn't really necessary, is actually a really good approach, because it keeps things simple and lets us get down to performing rhythms and so on and so on. In the past, I have developed certain instruments. I went through a period myself of building a lot of instruments out of things like plastic bottles and PVC pipes, and I found that you could actually use them. There was one particular version we had where you put it on your shoulder and sort of touched it against the back of your ear, back of your skull here, and the kids could kind of twang the string and get a bit of that oscillation. My kids are absolutely fascinated by musical instruments. Musical instruments are, I think, I've actually I think I shared in the sort of general discussion groups, I shared a link, I can reshare it, to an article I wrote on touch. And the idea that when we think as hearing people with functioning ears, when we think about hearing, we only think about our ears. But in fact, we're using a large part of our bodies that we don't really think about. We're using our feet, we're using our skeletal structure. If you're sitting in a chair on a bus or a plane, you're going to feel a lot of that vibration through your body. And that vibration in certain frequency ranges we translate as music, we translate as speech, and so on, except that we're actually exposed to a very broad spectrum range of sound. And, deaf kids are open to all of that. And also they're open to the culture of music and music making. So musical instruments, they see them all the time. They see them in music videos, and they're just fascinated with these instruments. If I bring out a guitar or something like that, they're all over the thing. They're breaking strings and they're going crazy. I've also seen a comment here about the experience is important. That's absolutely what it's about. I was listening to the opening address about music and developing, professionalism in music, which is really, really important. But I think music, and certainly all art making, is really important as a means of therapy, a means of engaging with all kinds of resources. So, for example, we're working with those symbols, we're looking at number divisions, we're looking at symmetry. Some of the things that I actually touch on, because I also teach grade 10 to 12 design. And in that subject, you start looking at concepts where you look at, analyzing images and look at things like symmetry and shape and so on. And all of those things are introduced at that level in terms of the shape beat making. And it feeds very nicely into the visual side. So, for example, there's an exercise I do where we paint with 2 brushes. And in sign language, if you want to describe a triangle, you might do it like this, or a square, or a circle. Now, if you're holding 2 paint brushes, then you can do the same thing on a piece of paper. So what I might do, for example, is I'll say, okay, I'll describe a shape. We start with very simple shapes. My kids draw very almost calligraphy style with both brushes. And then I start introducing more complex shapes. And then I start introducing location, which is a part of sign language where you work with a plane and you say, where's the shape? The shape is in the top left-hand corner or the bottom right-hand corner. And So they have to locate where the shape should be in terms of my instructions on the page. And that really translates very well into language, because if my learners are describing something, they need to be able to, especially in design exam, they need to be specific in terms of where something is and what it looks like. I've been given the thumbs up, so I think I've got a few minutes left.
Yeah, you've got about 4 minutes. If we can just back up, there was a question about rhythm patterns.
Oh, yeah, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. 2 against 3, 3 against 4. That's one of my loves. Yeah, irregular rhythms, rhythms that are polyrhythms, rhythms which run against each other. That's fantastic. I have explored that. The funny thing is that you can teach it explicitly, but you also find that kids come up with it themselves. When they're playing around and experimenting, they actually find those rhythms. The funny thing is when you try and write them down and when you work through the lens of standard notation, then sometimes you restrict yourself a little bit. But the kids just left to their own devices, they will introduce, in fact, even that rhythm that the last video I showed an example of how it could be scored, but in fact, the scoring isn't really accurate. The kids are actually throwing in half beats and quarter beats and all kinds of things into that. So absolutely, I'm reading your comment here. The results were good and bad. How would you think about effectively communicating these patterns to regular kids? I wouldn't use them. I wouldn't teach it on paper, first of all. I would just, you know, I'm going to tap out a, that's a 3/4 that I'm tapping on my desk now. And I remember learning it myself. And it took me a while because I'm actually very bad at rhythm. And this is the thing about being a teacher. I think you become a better teacher when you're bad at something, but you really, really want to learn how to do it. So you have to work out how to teach yourself, first of all, and that gives you the tools to teach it to someone else. So I would actually start in a very physical way, body percussion, table percussion, something like that. And then I would show them what it looks like on paper, which is also interesting analysis, to see how things can be described, how they can be recorded and shared in that way. There's some remarks here about YouTube link, whole body experience. Absolutely. I think that all of us need to be sensitized to the ways in which we're perceiving the world beyond just using our ears. And, you know, the world is a really interesting environment in that way. We're probably approaching the end of our time now, are we?
You've got a couple of minutes, so you can.
Yeah. So I don't know, how can we share? I'd like to share, I'll type in my email address, or has it already been typed in?
No, you can. So I've only got your work one. I want to just leave that.
Okay, I'm going to leave. I'm going to, you want to click on the work one, but I think probably more reliably, if you want to get into a nice chat, just my full name at gmail.com. And brendonbussy@gmail.com. Please feel free to contact me, email me, and we can start the conversation. I'm happy to share some of my materials, the presentation, you know, aspects of the presentation. I've got a few things I've written on which are online, etc. And hopefully you'll find them interesting and useful, because there's enough theory around, but you need actual tools that you can use in your classroom. I'm very interested in also integrating visual art or design with performance, which is the way I'm made up as well.
Sure. Brendon, thank you. Thank you so much. As you can see from the comments, people have really enjoyed this session. The numbers were growing as we were chatting, so I'm glad you popped your email address in there, because I'm sure people will probably go back and watch and then definitely get in touch with you. So thank you for your passion. Thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for sharing all your knowledge so freely and generously. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, thanks so much. I really enjoyed myself. Thank you.
All the best. Cheers. Bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.